All right, so I direct the Immigrants' Rights Clinic, and you might wonder what that means. It can mean a lot of different things. So just even if you're not interested in core immigration issues, there are a lot of issues that we address in the clinic. It's really a clinic that looks at any sort of legal issues that affect immigrants in the United States. That could be immigration issues, but it could be other issues as well. So just to give you an idea of the kinds of work that we do in the clinic, we do a lot of asylum and human trafficking works. We represent people who are trying to remain in the United States and seek asylum, or who have been victims of human trafficking. I'm going to talk about a national security case that we're working on, but a lot of the time, people who the government has accused of terrorism end up in the immigration system, and it's the kind of client that a lot of attorneys don't want to represent. And so, and there are unique issues that come up when you're talking about national security issues. And so we often take on those cases. We do a lot of detention work. So the immigration detention system in the United States is enormous. Hundreds of thousands of people are detained in the United States every year. Many of those people have never been convicted of a crime. They're just people that the government is trying to deport. And so we bring habeas petitions to try to get people out of detention and kind of argue on constitutional grounds that the government can't detain people indefinitely. We do civil rights work. So even though this isn't an immigration issue, immigrants often are the victims of racial profiling and other sorts of kind of disparate action by local and state police officers. And so when that happens, we bring 1983 civil rights lawsuits arguing that their constitutional rights have been violated. Crimmigration, which is the combination of the criminal justice system and immigration. So these two systems are very much intertwined. Many times people who've been long-term residents of the United States are subject to deportation because they've gone through the criminal justice system and have convictions on their records. And so all sorts of issues arise with that. We represent people who are fighting their deportation. And we believe that people who've served their criminal sentences shouldn't be punished a second time by being deported from the United States. We also train public defenders and other criminal defense attorneys on how to protect their non-citizen clients from deportation in the criminal justice process. We work on government transparency. We file FOIA lawsuits to try to get the government to release information about how it's treating immigrants in detention. We do a lot of policy work related to the issues of how the government is using technology to basically funnel people into the deportation machine. So just last year, we did a report on how the city of Chicago is using facial recognition technology to identify non-citizens at protests and then transmit that information to ICE. So this is sort of a new issue that's arisen. And then we also want to support organizing groups who are organizing around issues of immigrants' rights. And that could be nationally. It could be that we're supporting groups that are advocating for immigration reform nationally. And it also involves groups that are organizing locally in Chicago to make sure that Chicago and Illinois are good places for immigrants to live. So what I want to do is I want to talk about just a couple of projects in a little more detail so you can get an idea of what the students are doing in the clinic and the kinds of work we're doing. Most of what we do is litigation. We do some policy work and we do some kind of community education work as well. But when you're talking about the immigration system, there are courts in the immigration system. We have full-fledged trials every single year where students are examining witnesses, they're giving opening statements, they're giving closing arguments, we're writing legal briefs. We're really doing anything that you would do in a trial context in a state or a federal court, but it's an immigration court. So I want to talk about this case. This is our client, Omar Amin. Many of our cases we can't talk about because they're very sensitive and they're not public, and so I can't talk about them. These are a few of the cases that I can talk about because they've gotten a lot of attention. So this is one of our national security cases. Omar Amin is a refugee from Iraq. He arrived in the United States in 2014. And then a couple years after he came, some distant relative of his was arrested in Iraq for being a member of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. We don't really know for sure. So the government got suspicious that he was also a member of Al-Qaeda or of ISIS. And so they did whatever they could do to try to get him out of the country. They had no evidence really that he had done anything, but they had suspicions because he had this familial connection. They first tried to extradite him to Iraq for the murder of a police officer in 2012. It came out during the course of the trial that he was in Turkey at the time that the murder was committed and could not have committed the murder. And the federal court actually rejected extradition and said that the government could not extradite him to Iraq. They then put him in removal proceedings and tried to remove him as a terrorist. The immigration court found that the government had no evidence that he had any involvement in terrorism and rejected those charges. The government still is detaining him. The clinic, our clinic, filed a habeas petition on his behalf, essentially arguing that if the government thought he was a terrorist, they should charge him with a crime and put him through the criminal process. We won that habeas petition. A 2L argued that case in federal court. She did such a good job that her performance was the talk of cocktail parties afterwards, we heard later. Very, very impressive oral argument that she did. And still, our client is detained. The government has now switched the authority under which he's being detained. And so we're now preparing to file a second habeas petition to try to get him out. So he's been detained for over 4 years. Has not been charged with any crime, and the government is using the immigration system to keep him in detention, essentially because they know they have no real evidence that they would have to produce if they charged him with a crime. So again, this is federal litigation. We're in federal court. It's, immigration adjacent, but it really is about detention, due process rights of non-citizens in the United States, and the limits of the government's power to detain people indefinitely. We also do impact litigation in Illinois. So Illinois is a state that has a lot of very pro-immigrant legislation on the books. Just to give a couple of examples, last year, Illinois prohibited immigration detention in the state of Illinois by local jails, which is where a lot of immigrants are held. Second state after California to do that. And so this is great, but if local police departments don't comply with the law, then the law doesn't mean very much. So this last year, Will County decided that because they couldn't detain someone who was a Will County resident for ICE, that they were going to use a material witness statute to hold him. So they basically said, we're not holding him because he's an immigrant and we're not holding him for ICE. We're holding him because he's a material witness in another criminal case. That's not allowed. You can't just hold someone just because they happen to be a witness in a case. We brought a challenge to this misuse of the material witness statute. We won. Will County then tried to transfer him to ICE, which is also prohibited under the statute. And we got the Attorney General's office to intervene. He was released and he's back with his family. So we work with local groups to enforce the laws that Illinois has passed that are supposed to protect immigrants from being funneled into the deportation machine. We also care very deeply about our local Southside community. And so one of the projects that we have taken on is working with Centro de Trabajadores Unidos, which is a local Southside organization. And we run a legal clinic so that we advise their members on various immigration issues. These clinics happen by phone, so they're very easy for law students to handle. The law students handle the intakes, give the advice, obviously with me supervising. We've helped over 200 Southside residents figure out their immigration issues. And so this isn't litigation, this is a lot of client contact, and it's really providing a service to the Southside community, since that's where University of Chicago is located. And we feel very strongly that that should be a component of the work that we're doing. So that's very, very local, that's Southside. The final project I want to talk about is the work that we've done internationally. So we, in the fall after the US forces withdrew, it was chaos. You probably heard about it. Some 50 to 60,000 people who had a connection to the US government, had worked for the US government, had worked, alongside the US government, were told by the US government that they would be evacuated before US forces left. That didn't happen. The Taliban took over. And even though some tens of thousands of Afghans did make it into the United States, tens of thousands of Afghans were left behind in extremely difficult situations. The Biden administration started a program, a humanitarian parole program. So if you applied and the Biden administration looked at your application, the idea was that those people were going to be able to come in later. Okay, we actually took on about 50 applications. There was so much need that I actually pulled in 1Ls as a pro bono project. So you may know people who worked on these in addition to my clinic students. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has absolutely not lived up to its end of the bargain. They've essentially granted none of them. They've collected $50 million in fees from people who are in Afghanistan starving and hiding from the Taliban, but they have refused to adjudicate any of them, and there's no sense that there's going to be any relief in the future. They just recently put a new program into place for Ukrainian refugees. And of course, you could make an argument that we have more responsibility to the Afghans because we were there and it was a US occupation, and that led to them being in danger. Nevertheless, even though the Ukrainian program was announced less than 2 weeks ago, there are already people arriving who have gotten approvals under that program. Why would the US government do that and treat these two groups of people differently? You can think amongst yourselves about what the reason might be. We are preparing litigation to challenge this. This is going to be one of the projects that we're working on next year. That'll be filed in federal court, and it'll be filed against the government. We really like suing the government in the Immigrants' Rights Clinic because the government does a lot of things that are not good in the area of immigration. Like all the other clinics, students are involved in all aspects of this. I think it's fun. We get to work together. We get to change people's lives. Families get to stay together. People's lives are saved. Many of our cases are death penalty cases because if we lose, people get deported back to countries where they might be killed. So it's very, very high impact work. And I think we also, even though it's a very weighty subject, we have a lot of fun doing it as well. Okay, so that's it. I will answer any questions later if anyone has them.